Just getting started. We have 6 full games today, so we'll be going through all those. First game is from Tapas. Tapas is playing as black, and let's get started. Tapas is playing the London system, and I actually am curious here, just in terms of popularity. White's playing the London system, so early bishop f4, and then black is playing the other side of this. So I was sort of wondering, bishop f5 seems like a completely reasonable move. Like I've played bishop f5 against the London system before for sure, and I think it's solid, and I think it's a good move. But I was just sort of wondering, in terms of London system, what are the most common responses for black? The first is knight f6. The second is c5. The third is e6, then c6, then bishop f5. So bishop f5 is the 5th most common. That's kind of interesting to me. I don't know. It just seems like a really intuitive move. Like it's symmetrical, and it's not as if white's getting an immediate attack on the c7 pawn anyways. So I'm sort of like, I don't know. I'm a little bit surprised that bishop f5 is so far down the list. Anyways, bishop f5 is a completely fine move. So that's what Tapas plays. e3, e6, knight f3, knight f6, and yeah, symmetrical game. Looks good to me. I think this makes a lot of sense for black. Bishop d6. Okay, so here's where black sort of deviates from symmetry here. c6 is higher on the list than d6, than bishop d6. c6 keeps the symmetry here, is fine. In terms of looking at the eval, I'm sure it's almost identical. But yeah, just a very solid symmetry. This basically makes a lot of sense. I'm just, yeah, here, 1 second. Hey, welcome, our Paradox. Thanks for joining the stream. So this, this situation, bishop d6 is the move that breaks up the symmetry for black here. And by this point, basically black is a little bit better. c3 is somewhat an unchallenging move for white. I think on c6, I assume that flips the eval back towards white. So, this is an unchallenging move for white. Bishop d6 is actually considered to be objectively better than c6. I would play either. I don't think there's really an advantage of one over the other, but bishop d6 is played. So far, I have no objections with how Tapas has played this. This makes complete sense to me. Bishop g3, knight d2, knight d7, and knight e5 is a mistake. Yeah, so let's think about why this is a mistake. The most obvious. So in c5, in terms of here, like c5, the eval on c5 here is bishop takes b8, rook takes b8, queen a4. Because I would think, yeah, I assume this is what you're asking about, Willem, is what happens if black plays c5 here. If you're looking, if you meant earlier, we can go through that too, but. c5 here leads to bishop takes b8, rook takes b8, queen a4. So c5, bishop takes b8. Actually, queen takes b8 is probably better here. Yeah, right. I know it's a really good question, Willem. Please, always definitely ask, and I'll slow down or go over what you're asking about. Good question though. Because, yeah, it does seem really intuitive that you'd play c3 against c5 here. Like, c5 makes total sense. It's basically like it's as if black is seizing the white side of the queen's gambit. So, yeah, c5 makes a lot of sense there. Maybe it can be played next move. Bishop d6, knight e4. Knight e4 is good, I think. I think you might as well take that file. And knight e5 is not good, because here black can basically double the pawns on the e5, the e5 square. So on e5, black castles, but knight takes g3 was better. This full out wins the pawn. So here, knight takes d7 is not playable because knight takes h1, but h takes g3 is playable. And then black wins the pawn here. So that was actually a potential blunder for white. So yeah, this is important. This tactic here wins the pawn for black. Because basically on knight takes, white has to retake the knight, and then you can win the e4 pawn. The e5 pawn. So yeah, h4 I think is another similar issue. Here, f6, or even knight takes g3 and then f6 creates a major problem for white. Yeah, so h4 is a bad blunder. These tactics are pretty, these are important tactics. So on h4, either knight takes g3, pawn takes, and then f6. That looks pretty good, because black can play bishop takes g3 with check, or black can just play f takes immediately, and then on f takes, bishop to f4 could be the response for white. On knight takes d7 here, bishop takes g3, and then threats on this this f2 pawn. But overall here, I think this is just going to be good for black. I think good opportunities for black to kind of exploit some tactical oversights by white. This game, there's a number of kind of missed opportunities here, but ultimately black gets the better side of this, and apart from this, this hung knight on c2, this game ends up being pretty much under black's control the entire time. So yeah, so let's go through and take a look. I think the main oversights here, these volatility, this volatility curve here, if you look at this, is an indication that kind of tactical opportunities were missed. A lot of bouncing around between moves about, I don't know, 7 and 15. So yeah, overall, very tactical game. Again, I don't really think that it's super helpful for me to go look into tactical studies too hard. I think that most of that can be done best by an engine. So I'm happy to look through it a little bit, but I think mostly once it becomes a very tactically oriented game, it doesn't really help much to say, okay, the knight c2 is an oversight because of bishop takes c2, but this, yeah, so the main takeaway from this game, I think, is tactics training. You're hoping to eliminate volatility like this, and with enough tactics training, you really can. You're hoping to run the whole game flat like this line up until about move 7 or 8. Grandmasters play that way, but so I think in terms of how I want to analyze this, I think talking a little bit about this opening is probably a good idea. This is the London system, accelerated London system with bishop to f5. Symmetrical, generally good for white. It's a small sustained advantage. But if white plays in a way that's too unchallenging, like with c3 here, black, it goes from being a small sustained lead for white versus a small sustained lead for black. With bishop to d6, you're doing just fine. And, ideas like, I don't know, bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, those types of things tend to be best. Here, this knight takes g3 tactic is the best because this, this knight must be taken when removing the rook. But anyways, in terms of opening theory, I think we're in opening theory at least until this point. That it deviates with c4, which or knight to e5, which loses the pawn. So yeah, interesting situation. I don't know. I guess I would just say this. This is good for black, really. Knight takes g3 is the best, and it's the best on the immediately after knight to e5. But yeah, let's look at this accelerated London system, because there's a bunch of sidelines here, and I'm actually really curious about kind of how those go. Knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6, and basically black's looking just fine here. There's no real, there's no real danger for black here. This is, I guess this is the main line. Main line here is not c3. White plays c3 here. This is c3 is a line, but I like moves like bishop to d3, knight to b2, c4 better. I think it's good, particularly bishop to d3 and c4. I think white can only really maintain this initiative or maintain this eval advantage if he plays moves that challenge black here. c3 offers an opportunity for black to be the first person to make a direct threat in this game, bishop to d6. And I think that initiative, the initiative that's required to play an attack first, is something that has some value to black, both practically and objectively. So yeah, if white's not challenging you directly, play bishop to d6, give white some challenges. And here, basically c4 is inaccurate. For the same reason that I think the same reason that the c5 move for black was inaccurate. Here, rook takes b1, bishop to b4 really creates an annoying situation for black. The best move here is actually king to e2. This actually has happened in 13 master level games, which is kind of impressive. But this is actually a main line in theory where king e2 ends up getting played in the Queen's Pawn Accelerated London, and the eval here is still actually relatively close to equals. So this is pretty surprising to me. I think that basically castles here is fine, c5 is fine, and here both sides are pretty close to equality. Very interesting situation. Bishop f4, bishop f5, and black seizes the initiative by playing the first direct threat with bishop to d6. Interesting. Things are looking pretty good for black. In terms of the tactical study of this game, there's some value. When people analyze games, one of the things that they do that I don't think is super great is they spend a lot of time saying, oh, well, if he did this, then I could do this, then I could do this, and really just spending a lot of time assessing tactical play. But the truth of the matter is the computer's better than every human alive at tactical play at this point. So the whole post-mortem tactical assessment is it feels a little bit antiquated to me. I think that the computer is just better than everybody, so why spend time trying to recreate computer analysis? The computer analysis gives the objective best tactics, so I really just want to mainly focus on the opening theory and strategic concepts here. I think here basically white plays a quiet accelerated London. Black seizes the initiative by basically making the first threat. That could be a valuable thing to know against the London. That basically the advantages are small enough that a seized initiative by black can lead to an equal game. I'm gonna start playing the London. Basically thinking about this game, I think I'm gonna start playing the black side of the London more aggressively, just because I know that making the first threat creates initiative. White plays c3 in this type of situation, c3 or knight to d2 frequently. So making the first threat in those situations, I think, is good. Here, white ended up making a tactical error. They allowed knight takes g3, which wins this d4 pawn. But even without that, I think the strategic concept that this this opening analysis is pointing to, it's basically saying, all right, well, it's better to attack it's better to be the first attacker in the London system. That's worth at least a core some percentage of a pawn. And that's valuable. Hey, welcome, Aphelion. Thanks for joining the stream. Thanks for being here. So anyways, this assessment for the London I think is interesting. Yeah, king e7. We can look at this. The line here that I thought was super interesting was the one in which c4 gets played. And in c4, there's that basically mainline opening in which, where was this? It was in one of these sidelines. The cool line that was new to me looking at this. It was c4, bishop takes b1, rook takes b1, and bishop to b4. Is a wild sideline, and 13 master level games had this, which is really funny. This is a really awkward move for white to play here, and it's I don't know. To me, this is pretty impressive. Look at this white king that got stuck on e2. Pretty wild. But actually, this is mainline theory and not even that much. I think its eval's almost completely equal. So sometimes there are just cool positions like this king e2, and interesting stuff. Anyways, interesting London system. Thank you very much for sending the game, Tapas. And the takeaway was, I think bishop to d6 was a great move here. You basically got a slight equals plus from bishop to d6, and that's good. To be completely honest, I don't know what the Damiano defense is. I'm actually curious. I always, honestly, yeah, yeah, White's chilling on King E2. That's right. Um, but yeah, interesting. I don't know the Damiano defense. We can take a look. Damiano defense, chess. I don't know this one, to be completely honest. Um, that's what that's called. I've seen this before. I think this is not play. To be completely honest, I think this is not a playable game as black. But it doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is definitely playable. Knight takes e5, queen h5, queen takes e5. Yep. Yeah, yeah. I didn't know that's what that's called. That's cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I can see, yeah, that in this opening, e4. Oh wait, I guess it won't let me play it out of this game, but e4, e5, knight f3, f6, knight takes, pawn takes, queen h5. Yeah, and then the best move is probably king e7 here, but brutal. Hey, welcome, Limestone. Thanks for joining the stream. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. This is definitely good for white. Queen takes, king f7, d4. Should. Or wait, actually. Oops. What am I doing? Bishop is out the. Bishop to c4 is the response. Yep. Yeah. Interesting. I mean. Anyways, this opening's not playable for black. I think knight takes e5 is pretty clearly a win for white in that situation. So, anyways, very interesting situation. Our Paradox. Thank you very much for sending that game to Tapas, and let's take a look at the next one. Here we go. Okay, here's Baconfield versus Mr. Dog. All right, cool. All right, so interesting. Okay, so basically, white plays the French, and this is called. I guess this is called the normal variation. Interesting. Yeah, for sure. We'll take a look at it. Our Paradox. I think. I'm not sure which day that game is, but yeah, sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. Is it today? Okay, cool. Yeah, no, we can take a look at the Damiano defense. But this is interesting. So basically, French defense with b6. French defense b6 is about a 1%. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, because I think it's called the Owens defense, right? Unless I'm forgetting. But like e4, b6 here is Owens defense, which I've had masters play this against me once or twice. Supposedly this is actually pretty solid. E4, b6, but anyways, e4, e6, b6. Thanks, Jen. Jen works on Broadway, so she knows she knows all the musical theater people. E6, then b6 is the English defense. Interesting. Good question, Limestone. To be honest, I need a better labeling system. To be completely fair about it. Let's see. What's your username? What's your username, Lanston? What's the game's username under? I'll just take a look now. It's under Limestone. Okay. I don't see it for tonight, Limestone. To be completely honest, I do need a better labeling system. Yeah. Videos, yeah.
Let us know.
But Your game is tomorrow morning, Limestone. Yeah, no, it's tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Thanks for asking, Limestone. It's tomorrow morning during the 8 a.m. stream. Yep. I'm gonna. Yeah, it's gonna be 8 a.m. and 9:35 p.m. We're gonna try that for a bit, just because it works well with my class schedule that's coming up. But yeah. Yeah, no pressure to do that though. I'm about to send over some games, or I'm about to put some good labeling on YouTube videos. So I spent some time doing that today. Anyways, E4, E6, D4, B6, and yeah, totally. That schedule is gonna be pretty. I think that schedule is gonna be pretty good. You know. I don't know. It works a lot better with my classes, so that's mainly why I adjusted it. But I just figure I'll make it early in my day and late in my day. Then I'll have a set schedule for that. But that starts tomorrow, by the way. So tomorrow I'm gonna start doing streams at 8 a.m. Eastern and 9:35 p.m. Eastern. Just so everyone is on the same page about that. I'll make a big announcement on the Discord and stuff. But yeah. So anyways. E4, D4, B6. So how does hey, thank you very much for subscribing, Limestone. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining. Thank you for supporting the stream. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I think you're in the right ballpark, R Paradox. I think ideas like bishop to D3, knight C3, knight F3, bishop to F4, or bishop to G5. I think those are all the best moves for white. You know, E5 basically is pretty far down the list. And honestly, E5 is fine. You know, in terms of objective eval, it goes from plus 0.57 to plus 0.36. But yeah, well, thank you, Limestone. I mean, to be completely honest, I really want the lessons to be free, so I haven't decided what I'm going to do with the money from the subscriptions, but I'm definitely not going to keep it.
Take your sidekick on a trip.
Well, that's not. But no, I'm probably going to end up donating. I'm gonna end up donating the money somewhere. I think I've made about $150, somewhere between $120 and $150 since I started. But I always appreciate not just that you subscribe, but I appreciate that you enjoy the stream enough to subscribe. That means a lot more to me than actually subscribing. So. Anyways, very much appreciated, Limestone. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, local chess club would be cool. Maybe you know what? Maybe I'll I don't wanna like overpromise. That's not a charity, Jen. Yeah, I have chess.com premium. Just it comes with the title. But yeah, no, I'm not, the goal is to really have free chess lessons, so I'm not going to keep the, I'm not, it's not a lot of money, it's very appreciated, but I'm not going to keep that money. Anyways, E5, and then, so E5 is playable. Development for white is a, but you know what you were talking about? Cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate the, honestly, I appreciate the subscription, but like, don't feel any pressure to subscribe. Like, I am very intentionally and completely, this isn't what I do for a living. This is what I do because I want to work on a project that I think might be able to help people. So, I appreciate the subscription, but never feel pressure. Just, it's very nice of you guys to be here and to be supportive anyway. So, that's the main thing. Anyways, E4, D4, B6, E6. This ends up being good for. I don't know about that, Kiro, but I'm not on TikTok yet, to my knowledge. But I am trying to get my my lessons seen by a few other streams. So, interesting. Anyways, E4, E6, D4, B6, and white doesn't have. Ah, that's interesting. Cool. That's cool, Kira. Yeah, that I'm sure happens from time to time. Um, yeah. So e4, e6, d4, b6, and basically White's gonna have a center control. Black plays a flank opening against White's center. So my guess here is in this French defense normal variation, moves like c4, knight c3, bishop d3, knight f3, bishop f4. I think all of those are good ways to kind of advance this. I would basically play this relatively similarly to the modern. I'm just looking at the most popular moves, and they are sort of that. So c4, knight f3, bishop d3. I think all of those are good for white. So c4, bishop b7, bishop d3, and it basically looks sort of like a modern. It's like a flank opening. Yeah, yeah. No. I mean, it's a key point is basically you can usually play e4 and d4 against the modern openings and King's Indian Defense and Perk and stuff. But the key point is to keep the pawns generally on e4 and d4 and not overextend. In my life, our paradox, I've beaten some pretty high level GMs in 1 minute online. Those are probably my best wins, but I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that's the you're bringing up a good you're bringing up a good point, Willem, which is basically what the point of these flank openings is to basically come up with a center break at exactly the right time. So if you overextend your pawns, black can usually reclaim the center and clip the pawns that you've overextended. That's sort of the strategy here. In general, I'm not a huge fan of modern games. I feel like you're sort of giving your opponent advantages, by default. So that, that seems like a questionable strategy to me. But yeah, basically, having opening, basically having, an opening where you're intentionally giving your opponent advantages, where the hope is that they misuse them, is a dangerous strategy because your opponent might just play normally and then you're in slightly worse condition. Anyways, here, this is basically queen's pawn opening, and e5 is an aggressive way to play this. Probably not a bad way to play this. If you really want to turn it into the French defense, the most common move here is d5. But now with bishop to b7, I'm a little confused, and I don't know exactly what white's strategy here should be. Knight to f3, knight takes, knight f6. Basically, I think white's fine. Bishop to b3, bishop to d6, and white should be okay. D takes e5, pawn takes. I think white's fine. Maybe not, it may not be the most organized position, but white's looking good. I mean, basically there hasn't been much of an opportunity for black to reclaim the center. With bishop takes e5, black trades off one of the key pieces of a potential attack, and he trades off his good squared bishop for a knight on e5 that hadn't really been actively threatening anything. Rook takes, knight d7, rook e1, and now I think white's doing fine. This just looks good. White's rook on d1 makes sense, and in terms of counterplay, I wouldn't have done this. You're trading off a basically bishop to d6 trades off a like a bishop that had been posted for a knight that had never developed. So in terms of how many moves you've used to move this bishop to d6, this ends up being an error. I think the best move here, instead of bishop to d6, is probably a4. A4, pawn takes a4, knight takes a4, you need to do something to defend this bishop. A4 is what the engine is recommending. I think that's probably right. Here, black equalizes. So I like the posting of this bishop here. I would maintain it. Focus on getting this bishop out of the way. Yeah, all this sort of makes sense. But let's go back here. Overall, black plays a weird opening. I don't know white's pre-made strategy. I would play it similarly to the modern. I'd do stuff like c4, bishop d3, knight c3. But e5 is interesting. Where did the rook go? Yeah, sorry, I'll just play this back. Yeah, this was an error, right? I mean, this is a pretty serious tactical error. But that, yeah, that I mean that things were already in basically black's favor, but rook d6 certainly didn't help. I want to focus more on the beginning of the game. Yeah. Against the modern, do you try and transpose into a King's Indian defense? I mean, you don't really have control over that, right? I mean, if your opponent plays the modern, then you're gonna have the ability to play against or basically, if your opponent plays the modern, then it's their choice whether to turn it into the King's Indian or not. With g6 and knight f6. I don't know. I mean, I don't think you're either way it's a flank opening, so I think you're fine if white transposes it into King's Indian defense, but that's my that's my take. Anyways, on this thing, I would play this like the modern. I'd keep the pawns on e4 and d4. On bishop to b7, I'd come up with some piece development that defends the e4 pawn, probably bishop to d3. And I think white would be good here. e5 wasn't bad. E5 makes sense in the context of wanting it to transpose it into the French. This wouldn't be a great French for black, I don't think. It would be a French with a very early bishop to b7. But yeah, I guess e5 is the way that one could transpose it back into French theory. So in terms of improvements for white in this game, so far this has all sort of made sense to me. There's a tactic that the computer wants you to play, queen to f3. I guess that works. That basically attacks this pawn and pins it. But in terms of general, just general situation here, I would just take it, assess that it's similar to the modern, and basically play it, similar to the modern. Just since it's, it's the modern. It's the modern. So, most flank openings play pretty similarly. So I'd just go with the big center, big development, space advantage, all that stuff. Here's a knight d7, rook e1, a6. And, it's funny. I think this is fine. I don't see any problem with this posting as an idea. In terms of, I guess the engine wants you to play knight e4 and post the knight on d6. So the engine is proposing knight to e4 and then knight to d6 on the next move. I like that, to be honest. That it is probably a little better to post the knight on d6 than it is to post the bishop. But posting the bishop on d6 makes complete sense to me too. This is a fine idea. I don't think there's anything bad about that as a general idea. It's just that you've decided to commit a piece to e6, which I think is a good idea. But tactically speaking, the knight is probably a little bit stronger. Also, with knight to e4, aiming for knight d6, this isn't really a threat because you just play knight d6 and fork this knight and this bishop. So yeah, here, bishop e7, bishop d6, f4. But yeah, I would play a4 probably. I think a4 or a3 now. I think f4 is a blunder. So in terms of actual improvements in this game, I think there's two main ones. The first, all of this makes sense. Black's played a somewhat passive, unusual opening. You've turned it into something where you have a big center and center control and a space advantage. That all makes sense. The bishop to d6 post is considered to be slightly inefficient, but it makes sense to me, so I don't have any problems with that as an idea. Bishop takes b8, removing the bishop that you had posted. I think that's probably a bad idea. I think trading off this bishop for a knight is it just makes the moves that you made with this bishop inefficient. At this point, the bishop's moved 2, 3, 4 times. So basically, you moved that bishop 4 times to take a knight that had moved 0 times. I'm not saying that you should evaluate like moves based on the sunk cost, but like, it sort of makes that all that moving with the bishop inefficient. If you wanted to move the bishop that much and get this outpost, you should probably work to retain the outpost. So I think bishop takes b8 trades a piece that is very developed for a piece that is not developed, and I think that's an inefficiency. F4, I think here F4 is kind of a mistake. I think you probably want to play, you want to do something to hold on to your bishop. So this is an error. This is a tactical error. And then the next error is, this all makes sense, and then the next error is rook to d6. This is just a hung exchange. But to be fair, this game is close, this game is pretty... this game has a lot of problems for white at this point anyways. So as a takeaway from this, there's 3 moves that I would have made differently. I wouldn't have played bishop takes b8. You've worked hard to get this bishop to the d6 square, and once you have this outpost, you should continue to hold on to it. There was nothing prompting you to remove this bishop from this outpost, so I would just keep it there and keep it controlling potential squares that black could want to move to. Don't trade it off. You've spent 4 moves moving it there, or 3 moves moving it there. So keep it there. It's fine on d6. Nothing's threatening its position on d6. And then there's 2 tactical errors. There's f4 forgets to protect this bishop, and then rook to d6 is just sort of a 1-move tactical oversight. But those are the 3 errors in this game. I think you had a lot of good concepts. Black played this unusual opening, and I think you got a great position out of it. It was just, bishop takes b8 was a mistake, was a positional mistake, and then there were 2 tactical mistakes. But overall, I think it was a really interesting game. I really appreciate you sending it, and yeah, please send as many more as you'd like. I really appreciate you contributing material for the stream. Thanks. Okay, on to the next one. Here we go. Okay, this is Sub92's game. Let's take a look. So this is the Sicilian. I was looking at what this was called because I was going through and labeling all the openings that we've done today. I don't know how you pronounce this. Zemtsinov Rosalimo attack. This early bishop to b5. In this position, it's the second most common move. Basically, this is the old Sicilian. Bishop to b5 is the second most common play against it. I had no idea what that was called. It's not what I play as white. But yeah, so here, knight to d4, pawn takes, knight takes d4. Yeah, no, I've never heard, to be honest, like, it's never something that I've done white or black, so opening my knowledge of what these are called is not good. It definitely is easier to say. The Ross. Yeah, no, I can't, I can't. So yeah, so knight d4, knight takes, pawn takes. Knight to d4 is not the preferred move here. The preferred move is g6. I think that probably makes sense. I think this actually might even qualify. I don't know if this qualifies for our disqualification for the opening theory. It's close, to be honest. Because basically, knight to d4 here leads to an advantage of 0.94. So here, knight 0.94 is this should be good for this should be relatively good for white. This pawn structure is kind of weak, and it leads to 0.94. So I actually think this might fit the criteria of the openings of like the elimination from opening theory. Here, if we play g6, the advantage for white is like 0.3. So the criteria that I was using for removing a game from your opening theory was if the difference between the move and the best move from the engine's perspective was more than 0.5, and if the difference between the first and second, and basically if it's played less than 1% of the time, and it's worse than half a pawn, it's more than half a pawn worse than the best option, then it qualifies for getting eliminated from your opening repertoire. I think that's probably fair. I haven't screened out anything that didn't seem like something that should be screened out with that criteria. So yeah, so I was thinking this probably is pretty close. This game's played 282 times out of roughly 28,000. So like here you have a bunch of options, and I think this is about 30 something thousand. And so it's played just less than 1% of the time, and it's probably just over half a point worse. So I think if it's not literally screened out, you should consider taking this out of your opening repertoire. Anyways, g6 is the main move here. G6 here basically, with g6, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, I think is fine for black. Bishop to g7 is playable, and I think overall, black's looking fine. Bishop takes c6 is not really a threat here. If bishop takes c6, you just play d takes c6 and get a good open file for your queen. This is good. So knight d4 out of this Rossolimo, okay, is probably not correct. I think g6 is better. d6 is also looking pretty playable. But moving the knight out is just going to leave you with basically a doubled pawn that's difficult to defend. Anyways, in the game this happened. Now this pawn structure is kind of a liability for black. Why not take with the b pawn? Good question. G6 here, bishop takes c6. And I guess I would say that the advantage of having the immediate control that you get from this, in the center with this queen. B takes is taking towards the center, so I don't know. This might be a better pawn structure. I'm not sure. Rook b8. I guess there are reasonable. There are reasons why you could play b takes c6 here. I think d takes c6 is better, just because you get this queen controlling all of these squares. Yeah, no. It's a really good question, Willem. I don't know this opening super well. So yeah, d takes c6, and black basically gets control of this file. That's what's appealing to me about d takes. Another good thing about d takes is that it gives mobility to this bishop, this like light squared bishop that black often has problems with. But yeah, you're making a good point. I mean, b takes here with the ability to get the rook to a high mobility square. That makes sense. I mean, if you look at the theory, d takes is played about twice as often as b takes, but they're both played pretty often. So yeah, b takes is probably playable as well. I don't think, yeah, both seem decent. I don't think there's anything particularly bad about b takes. Yeah, no. I think you're yeah, I think you're about right on that. This does isolate that pawn, but it creates a lot of open squares. I mean, it makes sense. If you're playing it like a Sicilian, then maybe b takes has a lot of Sicilian characteristics. Because the issue is, basically, this is a Sicilian, but black has never gotten an open file on the queen side like he normally does. So, so here, maybe bishop takes, b takes, and then you get at least these open files in a more kind of traditional Sicilian position. Overall, very interesting. Really good point, Willem. Feel free, definitely makes the analysis more interesting if you guys have questions and stuff. So, rook to b8 seems to be one of the primary benefits of playing b takes c6. Anyways, the game continues. This is the g6 line. I like g6 better than I like knight takes d4. And a6 the main line. I think it's g6, right? I see a6 on here, but you know, a6 is on the list, but g6 seems to be the #1 most popular move. G6, G6, D6, and E6. Maybe in a tempo or two later. Again, like, I don't know this opening super well, so if you guys very easily could know like more about it than I do. I just like totally. This is never something that I played into as either white or black. I've seen games out of it, but I don't know it super well or anything. So, but I don't know. I don't like knight d4 as much as I like g6, because I think that bishop takes c6 poses no problems for black. In fact, let's see. After g6, bishop takes c6. I've got a feeling that this switches the eval almost towards equality. Yeah, no. I mean, I don't know it super well, to be honest, either, Aphelion. But it's great because I get to take a look at it now. Good opportunity for me to learn it a little better. Anyways, I'm not a fan of this. I think that this could be undermined pretty easily with d4, or this d4 can be undermined pretty easily. e5, c3, bishop c5, bishop takes, and overall, I think basically this is this is good for black. Knight c2, queen b6, queen takes, and yeah, white's looking fine. So I think knight d4 was just kind of a misplaced idea. I think g6 and kind of normal Sicilian structures will be the best play for black. In looking at this, I feel like black's got a good situation. Or sorry, white's got a good situation. Black's pawns are somewhat fractured. His development's better. White has the bishop pair. That's probably his biggest advantage here. And so the bishop pair and the disadvantage, the bishop pair and the bishop pair and the development advantage for white are the biggest assets. Anyways, this all looks good. D5, sure. This was actually good center play for black. Basically this pawn is backwards. In this position, this pawn is really inaccessible. This d7 to d5, I think. Yeah, no worries. No worries. Feel free to bring up anything you have questions on. Always. I'm super happy to go through stuff. But yeah, rook c8, bishop e3, bishop queen d6, and then black challenges with d5. This all looks good for black, and really good idea. D5 was just a smart way to play it, to be honest. This basically equalized the position. After d takes e5, or d takes e5 as a sideline, but after c takes d5, black develops and reclaims equal control of the center. So good stuff. Good playing. Yeah, exactly. If you strike back, it equalizes completely. That's exactly right. That was clearly the right plan for black. Okay, rook takes d1, good. And basically here, I think black's just fine. It's going into sort of an equalish endgame. It's sort of complicated. And, yeah, I think that black's just fine. I don't know how this ends up, but looks like a draw to me. Yep, it's a draw. Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's a draw. Interesting. Interesting game. Thank you for sending it, Sub, and we can take a look. So knight d4, I'm not sold on. I don't think knight d4 is the move here. It gets close to the elimination from repertoire status. G6 is the main move here. D6 is the second most popular move. But knight to d4, I think, leaves you with a pawn structure that you don't really want. This all makes sense. And yeah, d5 was great. This was a really strong idea. Basically, if you equalize in the center with this, I mean, d takes e5 is a better continuation for black or for white, but I like this a lot just as a general concept. Equalizing in the center, it does make the position more open, so these bishops might get some advantage from that. But just the way that this challenged white was very important. Here, basically black's at a spatial and developmental disadvantage, but it basically equalizes after d5. Cool. And black's looking fine. No issues. It's a draw. I'm seeing if you had any other opportunities here, to be honest, but to me, I think you basically made an error with knight to d4. Managed to kind of get out of that position where you were almost a pawn down, and then played some very intelligent middle game, ideas. Looks good to me. Yeah, this game is extremely accurate. There wasn't a lot there for me to really comment on. Not a fan of knight to d4. And also consider that, in these types of long end games, there are 30 moves of endgame. The accuracy scores get really jacked up. That's really what's going on here. But yeah, in terms of errors, I would say that knight d4 is probably worth screening out. And then, yeah, after that, I think d5, sure. But black's fine. No issues. And nicely played. Good work. Yeah, good work, Sub. Good playing. The main suggestion that I have, I guess there are slight inefficiencies here. The engine doesn't really like bishop to b7. I don't know, but I think that most of your issues stem from this. I mean, basically, after knight to d4 is played, white's up by almost a pawn. E5 is also not the preferred move. The preferred move is e6. But yeah, just awkwardness that you're sort of tied to. I'm not a fan of that opening, to be honest. So that's the correction that I would make. Otherwise, it's a very accurate game, 97.3. So it's sort of difficult for me to come up with much there. Yeah, thank you very much for setting it, Soup. My biggest advice: don't play knight d4. It gets close. It either fails or gets very close to failing my my test for keeping things in your opening repertoire. I like that test. I'm sticking with it. Okay, cool. Next game. X Paradox's game. Okay, here's a quick one. This is the Damiano defense. Shows why Damiano is bad. Queen h5, king e7, queen takes. And from here, I think if we do an analysis, I think it's already a mate, to my knowledge. But yeah, overall, this is not a good game for white. So d4, I think, is a way to go. h4, g6. But yeah, overall here, I think white's just better. Yeah, don't play this opening. Knight takes. It's interesting. Without pawn takes, black still has some play. I'm pretty sure you could, since people are playing stuff like the Stafford, if people are playing stuff like the Stafford, then, this is actually a better eval than the Stafford for black. Just so we compare these two, e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes, knight c6, knight takes here, and then options are like d takes or b takes. So say, I think it's, what's the preferred one here? D takes, I think. But here the eval is actually it's 1.44, 1.7. Okay, it's d takes. I mean, honestly, I think I'm not a fan of this opening. So giving your opponent an advantage of 1.44 is not good for black on move 5. But what's interesting about this opening is the even advantage here for white is still only 1.32. So, you could play this, the same way that you play the Stafford, right? I mean, if the eval on the other one is 1.44 and the eval on this one is 1.32, then this is no worse than the Stafford. I don't know. I mean, I trust the engine. Maybe I'm putting a lot of faith in the engines, but in terms of practical compensation, I mean, I don't know. You have a free attack here. You can play like knight h6. I'm not by any means advocating this, but I'm just saying, comparatively, this is actually not much worse than openings that people seem to be playing at this point. Anyways, don't play this opening either. I mean, it's play the openings that are fun for you, but objectively speaking, that's not a good opening. Queen h5, king e7, bishop c4, and then looks good. Is h4 better than d4 here? Nope, h4 is best. Cool. All right, mate coming. Nice. So yeah, good call. Good playing. I mean, play openings that are fun for you. I mean, I don't know. That's the highest priority in my mind. If it's fun for you, then play it. But I'm saying that if it's fun for you to play this, then you can play this if you like, or you can play this as black. 1.32 is not the end of the world, as modern openings will indicate. But anyways, this ends up good for white. So yeah, good stuff. Yeah, if you just don't take the knight, right? If you don't take the knight, then you can play bishop to c5 or something, or queen to e7. Queen to e7, how about that? I mean, here, knight e3, you don't even lose material. I mean, there's problems for black, but, like, you're not down material. Anyways, I don't advocate playing it. I was just sort of impressed by the eval is not as terrible as it could be. Anyways, let's take a look at the next one. The next one is Rat Hot Dog's game. Cool. Rat Hot Dog is playing black. And let's look. So, in this situation, here you go. This is the three knights Nimzo Indian. Bishop to b4, knight f3, bishop takes, b6. Basically, white's looking good here. I think, yeah, knight to h5 maybe. Bishop to g5, sure. Let's take a look at the opening book. Nimzo Indian is interesting. East Indian Defense. So here's where white plays an unusual move. I don't think this is bad. I don't think bishop f5 could ever be that terrible, but yeah, it's fine. It's not the normal move, though. Normal move in this opening is queen to c2. Second most common, e3. But bishop f4 followed by e3, I think that's fine. I mean, to be fair, Rat, the issue with bishop to f4 is, the issue with, I mean, bishop f4 is not an in theory move. So I guess this is sort of an interesting point, which is basically like, I try not to be too dogmatic about playing like, really specific opening theory here. What you can do is, you can play moves like knight to e4, you can play d5, but bishop takes c3 is kind of not, it's like, I know that there are lines here with bishop takes c3, but they tend to come after a3. I think you can just leave the bishop there if you're not prompted to do anything. Bishop f4 takes you out of opening theory, but d5 I think is better. Anyways, bishop f4, bishop takes, b6. Now black's looking fine. I think your option here instead is, your option here, knight f6. This ends up being better for black, better for white. F6 is better, but I don't know. F6 also takes away the escape square. Keep things appropriate. Family friendly.
Hey, they all watched it.
Yeah. But anyways, this bishop f4 as opposed to bishop f4 is I think an out of book move. I don't think it's subjectively that bad, but d5, knight to h5, bishop to g5, f6 is yeah. You're scared your knight would be awkward.
Our night would be awkward.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Knight to f6, bishop to d3, and I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with knight to f6, to be honest. I mean, I guess let's play through the engine line here and see what the problem with knight to f6 is. I'm just kidding. But man, you know, considering that chess is mainly played by like, I mean, I don't know. I'm surprised at how not family friendly Queen's Gambit was, considering it was not a family friendly show like at all. It was probably like R-rated. Anyways, yeah. So yeah, you're right, Rat. You're right about that, Rats. You make a good point. But here, it was a good show. I'm not gonna lie. I enjoyed watching it, or I enjoyed parts of it. I didn't like it. Jen liked it more than I did, for example. Yeah, knight takes e-pawn. Sorry, I know I'm bouncing through this a little bit. Right. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, Rats, for sure. I'm just thinking, like, was knight f4 the move here? I sort of like the engine is saying that knight df6 is the move, but I'm actually curious about knight to f4. Like, what would happen if you played this move more early? Knight to f4. Yeah, anyways, in this game, I mean, this is a really interesting game, Rats. So bishop f4 took you out, and then I think that basically I would have played d5 as opposed to bishop takes c3. Nothing terrible about bishop takes c3, but I just think d5, you know, wait until a3 to play bishop to take c3. Otherwise, you're just sort of trading black's good squared bishop for the knight. And then going back, doesn't d5 undouble his pawns? Yes. Yeah. No, well, I mean, you know, if you play d5 before you play bishop takes, then that's not doubled pawns. But yeah, I think white ends up with a less fractured. Yes. This is Nimzo Indian, but I think the d5, you know, and black ends up with a less fractured pawn structure, or white ends up with a less fractured pawn structure on bishop takes c3. But I still like d5. You know, I think what basically black making a play for the center here makes sense. You know, castling makes sense too. But yeah, like d5 here, you know, you might as well control the e4 square. If you have the opportunity to take center control, I think it's probably going to be worth it. I'd wait until white prompts you to play bishop takes c3, but Anyways, it's not bad. It's just I think some focus on the center might be helpful. But then again, I have a bias because I'm used to playing the semi-Slav positions, so I always sort of gravitate towards semi-Slav, e6, d5, c6 structures. So just consider, I have my own biases too. So that's what I would say there. So I might be leading in a direction that's away from kind of standard Nimzo-Indian stuff and more towards semi-Slav. Anyways, let's go back to the tactical position that we were thinking about. Knight h5 is fine. Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. It looks really natural, right? I mean, I was looking at this and thinking if there's any way to get like f6, f5, and then h6, g5 in. I like or I was thinking King's Indian defense structures here, right? King's Indian defense, like f6, g5, g4, and start an actual attack on the king side potentially. White's queen side is too open, so the king pretty much has to castle king side or not castle at all. So I was thinking King's Indian defense structures could be interesting. But you're in a really interesting situation. Because I am curious about how to basically clear out. I understand the knight takes f4 threat. I think the knight takes f4 threat makes sense to me. If you play knight h5 threatening knight takes f4, after f6 g4 traps the knight. Yeah, but you get the bishop though. So like if you try it this way, f6 and then potentially g4 here, and the knight is definitely trapped. But here you can play f takes g5, f6, bishop h4, and then I'm wondering if you can just play you can play either g6 or g5. G5, I don't know if there's a tactical issue. No, I think this structure actually works fine. So interesting. I mean, it's kind of a weird structure, but I think this might be preferable. f6, bishop h4, g5. Then I'm looking at, I guess knight takes g5, pawn takes g5, and then queen takes h5, pawn takes h4. So that would win it. So that's not playable. Why is g4 a blunder? G4 is a blunder because so f6 g4. I think it has to do with the pressure that black's going to get on this diagonal. So pawn takes, f takes, pawn takes, and then bishop to b7, I assume. Or actually, they say queen f6 first, but I think bishop b7 is the same general concept. Yeah, bishop to b7. It wins at least this pawn on d5. Yeah, his king side's mad weak. Exactly. That's it. So... Yep, no, that's a good explanation. So... Knight h5, threatening bishop to f4, and then f6, g5 I think is a better idea. f6, bishop h4, g5, and then there's no tactical sack with the discovery here, so you can just play knight takes g3 if you want after. I'm not sure if this would be considered to be the best move. I don't know. But yeah, that is evaluated as slightly better after bishop to g5, knight f6, and then bishop to d3, c5, and bishop to b7. And basically, I would say black is fine. There's not really that much going on. It's going to take a number of moves before white can launch an attack on the king side. But yeah, I think overall here black's doing fine. But this was the other error, bishop to a6. After bishop to a6, knight takes, queen takes, and you've lost the pawn. You get the pawn back on c4, but this is kind of rough. I don't know. g6 maybe, knight g6. But you're really under a serious attack now as black. So overall, this has played out pretty badly for black. The king side wasn't secure enough to start all these moves on the queen side. Your best option as black is probably to do is probably to open up the position and have the second file available for like resources, like queen f7, queen g7, and you have active defense on black. That's probably the best idea, but this is tricky. Bishop g5, knight f6. So the first improvement is f6 g5 tactic was stronger. That I think is okay. That's understandable. But if you retreat here, then you lose that tempo. Never a good thing. Probably not the worst thing in the world, but not a good thing. C5, I don't know. C5 makes sense to me. I think D5 makes sense too. I like, I understand C5 doesn't disrupt the, C5 doesn't disrupt the, like, bishop fianchetto file, but I don't know. Castles, bishop b7. Yeah, too many moves spent on the queen side here, in my opinion. Anyways, this ends up being this ends up trading off into a draw. I think given how exposed Black's king side had been, I think trading off into a draw was probably a good, a good general strategy. This seemed to play out pretty well. A6 lost your winning chances. Yeah. Yeah, this leads to a lot of structural weakness. Yeah, no, that's totally... That leads to a lot of structural weakness for black. Yep. Yeah, makes sense. So let's go through this front to back and see where the improvements were. Bishop f4 was an unusual move. Bishop takes c3 I'm not a fan of. I play d5 in this situation. Bishop takes c3 trades off a developed piece with a tempo for white. So, or basically a free recapture, free time for white to recapture. You're basically now down in development. If you play something like d5, your opportunities to get development with knight c6 or bishop d7, those tend to be better. Bishop takes, pawn takes. And here, there's a tactical improvement, f6, g5. This isn't terrible, giving back the tempo's fine. I guess I would say there were multiple opportunities to play d5 here where it didn't get played. I know that d5 might be anti-thematic, but I think objectively speaking, like, it was probably the right move. d5 here, I assume this is the best move. d6, I guess, is considered to be better. Why does c5 make you -2? Well, I mean, I think it's, my main problem with it is it doesn't really have that much utility. You're not really breaking the center here, is the main point. Like, pawn takes d4, and white just recaptures with his doubled pawn. So, I think mainly it's not something that has a super high level of utility. Like, what, so first, I mean, pawn takes c5, I don't think, I think that's not the best move, but I don't think that strengthens your pawn structure in any way. But I think that basically, what does this do, really? It's sort of, relative to something like bishop b7, right, where you have like a piece that's more developed, or d6, in which case you'll have, you'll be blocking the e5 square and have a square for the knight to develop. Like, c5 is, c5 is sort of the type of move that, like, in a flank opening, you're always looking at moves like c5 to try to break open the center, but I don't think this is actually the right resource to break open the center. White can just sort of ignore it, and the center's not broken down in any particular way. It's sort of just fine. It's not really doing anything. It's just kind of, I don't know. I like, the idea. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, if you got the doubled pawns doubled and isolated, like pawn takes c5, pawn takes c5, I think that plays out pretty well for white, or pretty well for black. I mean, this is going to be an endgame liability, but, um, uh, yeah, but I don't think you can really prompt much of a trade from white. I think white's just going to ignore everything. My argument is just do d5. I think do d5, be ready for pawn takes c4, and keep your fianchetto with pawn takes c4. I think that's just a better course of action. Otherwise, with c5, you're not really, you're giving white e4 as well. White's got a huge center here. So I think you need to do something with the center. Earlier, I would also play c5, or play d5. I know that this isn't always the Nimzo Indian stuff, but, like, I'm definitely pushing for d5 here. Earlier on, first, and then even in this middle game, I would play d5 over c5. Just challenge the center. C5 doesn't really make an effective challenge on the center. D5 holds the e4 square at least. In terms of continuing on, d5 is, potentially annoying for the bishop on b7, but you can always fix that with pawn takes c4. That's not really a lasting issue. So, yeah, I'm pushing for d5 in multiple positions in this middle game. Okay, now you're in a situation where the bishop is kind of not that great. I think maybe I sort of like bishop to c8 here. Bishop to c8 and then a plan to develop the bishop along this diagonal. Once this is locked up, right? Yeah, I think objectively it's just better. D5 is, D5 challenges the center. C5 is, a break that people do in the modern when D6 has already been played, but it challenges white's center more, and I think that's important. I also think that bishop to c8 over bishop to a6. If bishop to c8, then you get this bishop on this diagonal, and I think that diagonal is like way, significantly better. Even if you look at, so with the same issue basically. This knight takes e5 is still available here. Here, knight takes e5, queen takes. Oh, and then the queen gets trapped, right? Okay, so there's a tactical reason too why knight takes e5 isn't playable. But yeah, bring the bishop to this diagonal. I think this bishop is better on this diagonal than it is on the a6 f1 diagonal. Yeah. So, interesting situation. Traded off into a draw, but just want to just finish up this thing. I think bishop takes c3 doesn't really make too much sense here. I think bishop takes c3 basically trades off your good squared bishop for this knight. That might be fine. If white's playing for it, then you can play bishop takes c3 and take d5. But yeah, I think a lot more play for d5 here. Is the correct strategic change in Black's game. I think it needed to be played, and control over e4 is important. These center positions are important for Black to take control of if possible. This ended up with white as a huge center, and this seemed like this basically was an issue. D5 not that great. Bishop to c8 is better than bishop to a6 here. And, yeah, overall here, Black, I think, is, with tactically resourceful defense, Black will draw. So, at the end of the day, Black draws, that's not too terrible. If Black draws, that's not a terrible outcome for Black. I mean, Black is always playing from behind. But in terms of improving this game, I wouldn't have played bishop takes c3, and I would have made much more aggressive plays for d5. Then I would have brought the bishop to the c8 file and along this diagonal. This diagonal is more promising for black's white squared bishop. I'm also wondering about knight f4 here. This is the position that I was curious about. Knight f4 and yeah, things I think should be relatively good for black. It's a good outpost at least. But allowing this knight takes gives up basically gives up a good center pawn versus a pretty weak, not weak, but not particularly useful doubled pawn. So yeah, overall, I think you wouldn't have played this if you played this game again, but I think d5 is kind of a neglected move in the strategy of this game for a lot of it. Interesting situation. But yeah, d5. Be quicker to play d5, I think, and I think you're good. Yeah, knight posting on f4 too, maybe. Anyways, thanks very much for sending that game, Rats. Really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to send that over. Very interesting stuff. And yeah, overall, yeah, thanks. Please keep sending them. Very interesting game. Good job, providing the good defense to draw this. Good job securing that tactic. And strategically, I would just play an earlier d5, and I wouldn't play unprompted bishop takes c3. Yeah. Yeah, Nimzo's an interesting opening. I mean, it's not one, to be completely honest, it's not one that I know a whole ton about. Like, there's some places where my opening theory is pretty strong, but I would say there it's pretty average. So, so yeah, it's a good opportunity for me to get to play that opening through. Not a particularly strong area for me, but yeah. Anyways, thanks very much for sending it, Rats. Please keep sending them. And yeah, my takeaways are just it may be anti-thematic, but I think a d5 would have been useful at multiple points in that game. Challenges the center and prevents e4. Anyways, thanks a lot, Rats. Appreciate it. Please keep sending games. Super happy to look them over, and very interesting stuff. That's actually super helpful in having me learn more about that opening. Cool. All right, so here's Kiro's games. Kiro's game, c4, e6. So this is, basically probably going to turn into the semi-Slav. Yep, semi-Slav structure. Cool. I like this structure, Kiro. I think this is always a fine idea. Always a good decision. And pawn takes c4. I'm not a fan of pawn takes c4. I know it's a relatively common move here, but I don't see any reason to not hold on to this triangle. This formation is good. I mean, it's basically it's completely self-sustaining. White can't really get into it. The one weakness that it creates is this light squared bishop, but that problem usually ends up resolving itself I don't want to say resolving itself somehow. Usually it resolves itself with a trade on d5 at a later point, and then the bishop gets this very natural diagonal. But I like this structure. I don't think the development of this white light squared bishop is super urgent for white. So I always like just the solidness of the semi-Slav the Slav semi-Slav defense. Triangle system. I like it. So yeah, when you break up the pawn takes c4, I do think that this... let's take a look at the eval. It may not shift the eval all that much, but I like white's chances better with the more fractured pawn structure. This is just really solid. But again, this is an opening taste thing. That's played solid 10-15% of the time. But okay, so you played it there. Bishop d2, knight f3, knight d7, castles, bishop e7. Basically, black's looking fine. Let's go back. Knight e5 is what was played here. Knight e5, bishop b4. Queen a5 is probably an error. I think knight d5 is the move. Yeah. So if you look at this, situation, this is a what's a good aggressive opening for white? I guess I would say I don't know. I mean, I like the Italian game. If the Italian game is aggressive enough for you, I like the Italian game a lot. Um, uh, what else? I don't know. Scotch. Scotch is cool. Italian and Scotch are the two openings that I like that give aggressive positions for white. Yeah, exactly. Nailed it, Jen. But yeah, so here, bishop to b4, knight to c3, queen a5. But knight to d5 is the opening book move here. Queen a5 leads to a shift of about 1 point versus the optimal move. So I think that knight d5 you can safely say is the opening improvement here. This is just going and playing the mainline opening versus something that's not played in the opening book. With this, you're putting pressure on c3. With the move like bishop d2, you can then play b5. You've sort of committed to a system that I don't particularly like. Basically here you're sort of playing something that looks like the Queen's Gambit accepted in some ways. I'm not a fan. I really prefer, semi-Slav triangle system, like very solid, pretty conservative stuff. But yeah, so knight d5 over queen a5. Queen a5, I think, may cause some problems for black. Bishop to d2, sure. Queen a6 is interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, no. I mean, it ends up transposing, basically with, if you don't like Queen's Gambit, I'm not a fan of Queen's Gambit accepted in general. I keep this structure together as black, and that seems to work reasonably well. Like, let white take you on d5. But the theory here is knight to d5, if this is a line that you're interested in playing again. Knight d5 here, and pressure on this knight, and then on bishop d2, b5. So interesting. Queen a5. Queen a6 is interesting. Yeah, sure. It supports the c4 pawn, that's fine. Knight takes, bishop takes, knight there. But overall, I think black's in, it's basically an interesting situation. This pawn is a little overextended, but this pawn is very overextended. This pawn provides a big point of vulnerability for white. So in this eval, white's a little bit better. I think I would do just normal stuff here. Choosing between castling and rook d8. I would probably castle here and just improve my king safety. Bishop plays to g5, I assume. Oh, this happened. Okay, yeah. So yeah, this is what I would have played here for sure, Kiro. E5, queen b5. And yeah, I think basically black's in good shape. Strong general position. I mean, you're doing great here, considering that this is a GM, right? Or didn't you say this was a GM? Yeah. Okay. So it's a draw. Anyways, yeah, great draw. It was a simul. It was a simul in a GM. Okay, cool. I was like, geez, this guy's really. But yeah, a GM simul. Okay, cool. It's still a great draw. Drawing a GM in a simul is not an easy thing to do. Yeah, so defense on c4, cool. So yeah, so I guess the biggest point of the most obvious point of improvement that I'm seeing is knight to d5. Also, pawn takes c4 is a little bit speculative, but no, it's a great draw, Kiro. Drawing a GM in a simul is an accomplishment. That's a good draw in any case. I mean, he's not playing at 2600 level, but like, still a good draw. So. Yeah. Yeah, I have questions about pawn takes c4. I'd probably just leave that alone. But if you want to play this theory, then the theory here is knight d5. But let's keep going. cool. I think this looks good. Bishop takes. E5, queen b5. And yeah, I think, you know, bishop e6, but overall, I'm liking black's position a lot. I think ideas like, yeah, queen a5, sure. But black's looking fine. No real issues. Yeah, goes into a draw. I don't know. I mean, you know, how you know what how many errors could you have made if you draw a GM? That opening theory thing is probably the biggest thing that I'm finding. But I'm kind of curious. Yeah, 96.8. I mean, it's a very accurate game. Well played game. Sort of curious about what shifted this from a more. Why is bishop f1 a blunder? Let's look. Bishop f1 is a mistake. I assume just rook d7. No? Rook takes f3. I guess it just hangs this pawn, right? Yeah, I think it's just that. I think it's just that hung pawn, and then you know, potentially, you know, and then the bishop has the choice of where to go next. So let's say bishop e2. Now rook takes f2. Yeah, king takes, and then you have a rook on the 7th with the king also on the 7th. This has to be pretty good. Yeah, but I mean, then you're just sort of moving back and forth, but except you won a pawn. If it gets met with bishop g2, then you know, you can just play rook f d3. I assume that's, I mean, rook f d3 is fine. You know, you're up 4 points. The engine's finding sacrifices to do with rook takes f2, which I guess makes sense. I mean, you know, opening up this f file and having rook to d7 winning the 7th rank looks pretty dangerous. But yeah, it's that. So yeah, overall, Kiro, I think conceptually this is good stuff. You know, you move your rooks to the open file. I mean, this is great control of this open file for black. Nice work. Yeah, but yeah, I think that you know, you continue to control this open file and clip a pawn. And then the engine has all these crazy yeah, rook to d2. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're right about that, Kira. That is a better tactical follow-up. Bishop e2, rook d2. Or no, maybe not though, because then you're losing 2 rooks for a queen, and I'm not sure that's that great. Well, I don't think it's that. I think it's partially that it's so the eval shifts by about 2.5 points, right, or 2.75 points. So I think basically the engine has all these crazy lines where it's sacking on f2 and it has like a big positional advantage from it. So yeah, so rook to d2 is an idea, and fine, but the idea that makes this so valuable and what makes bishop f4 identified as a blunder is that basically whatever happens, rook, or I mean, I guess if rook challenges on d1, maybe not, but you're gonna, it's mostly about the threats that you're getting on f2, including a sack there. Yeah, I mean, you know, Simul's, you know, it's not a GM at full strength, but it's still a GM. So very cool stuff. Thank you very much for sending that over, Kiro. And yeah, I mean, you know, you played an accurate game, 96.8 eval. You know, the only thing that I really have in terms of constructive correction is knight to d5. Otherwise, everything played out pretty intuitively. Like, I think you did a great job taking control of this this d file. Rook takes f3 is particularly strong because of the threats. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, if you keep improving, maybe you'll beat a GM over the board. Like, you can beat GMs if you play enough. If you play enough games on chess.com, you'll win. You'll win against GMs eventually. Some GMs in particular aren't particularly good at blitz and bullet, so you can sometimes nail GMs where that's not their strength in those faster time controls. I think you'll get there eventually. I wouldn't surprise me. But yeah. Anyways, here, this yeah, rook takes f3 is better, partially because it wins a pawn. partially because you keep control over the second rank, and partially because of the sacrifices that you can get on rook takes f2. If we look at an engine line, say something intuitive like bishop to g2, just rook takes f2, queen takes f2, knight to g4, and bad problems to do with the safety of the king in particular. Basically, white has completely entered this, or black has completely entered this white position. Yeah, but at the same time, you have to any kind of progress is good, right? I mean, I don't know. I assume for me it would be a milestone to beat a GM one-on-one at any time control. I think I'm still thinking about the first GM that I beat over the board. I've only beaten probably 2 or 3 GMs over the board, but yeah, I mean, they're all milestones is the main point. So anyways, very interesting stuff. Thank you very much for sending the game, Kiro. Very accurate game. I don't have a whole lot to add. The engine adds some stuff relating to tactics, but I think you played in a pretty intuitive way. The only thing that I would say is on the review of this, knight d5 is the theory move and not queen to a5. But the actual middle game play all seemed to be pretty accurate. Don't think there's much in the way of problems there, or nothing really that I can sort of identify, or identify better than the computer, for sure. Rook takes f3 was the move here. Not something I probably would have seen myself, but something that the computer finds. So, yeah, good stuff. Thanks for sending it, Kiro. Feel free to send as much as you'd like in the future. And, yeah, thank you all very much for being here. I think I'm going to wrap up. Thanks all for joining the stream. And we have a new schedule starting tomorrow. So, starting tomorrow, I'm going to be doing streams at 8 a.m. Eastern. Should you have played for a win? Nah, it looks pretty drawn. Honestly, should you have offered a draw? Should you have accepted a draw? Like, let's look at the place where it was the best for you. See, the thing is, you were up 6, Kiro, but the thing is, I wouldn't have taken the draw if you don't see rook takes f3 in the follow-up. I would just treat this as a, considering that the computer sees tactics that we don't see, right? I would say that the tactic rook to f2, or so basically rook to d, treat this as the actual eval. Here you do have great penetration of the of the king side, but I don't know. Maybe decline a draw here. I would probably decline a draw in this situation, but I also wouldn't fault you for accepting it. Anyways, it's a good question, Kiro. I think that... Nah, I guess you play for a win there. It's probably the best idea. I would accept a draw around here, though. Here, I think it's pretty safely drawn. And in fact, here, I argue that practically, like, with the bishop pair, white might have better chances. So I would accept a draw in this situation. At the situations that were best for you as black, maybe I would decline a draw, but at the end of this, I would accept a draw here. I'd see the better minor pieces for white and accept the draw. So anyways, really interesting stuff, Kiro. Yeah, I just wanted to go back. So I have the next stream is at 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, and the stream after that is so 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, and then I'm going to start doing streams at 9:35 p.m. Eastern each night. So yeah, so a change from the schedule. This is mostly because of new classes that I'm taking with new schedules that they have. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys. I hope you guys can still make it. I hope the schedule is still, decent for you. And, worst case scenario, feel free to always watch video on demand. My goal is just to give completely free chess lessons. And I'm hoping that, I'm basically hoping that with free chess, I'm hoping more people give free chess lessons. But that's really the goal. So it doesn't really matter to me whether you watch, it's nice if you're live and I can, see exactly what you were thinking as we're reviewing the games, but not offended in the least if the schedule doesn't work for you. Feel free to watch video on demand. And yeah, I really appreciate you guys being here. Feel free to send in as many games as you like. And yeah, on to a new schedule tomorrow. Very curious to see how that goes down. And yeah, good stuff. Thanks all for being here tonight. Thank you all very much for contributing and for sending your games. Yeah, next stream is at 8 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow, so 2 hours earlier than it had been before. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for being here. Have a good night. I'll see you. Bye.